Her street boy offered to fix a Ferrari for 50 grand, and the millionaire laughed. But within minutes he exposed a hidden crime no expert could detect. The engine roared back to life, silencing the crowd. He took only what he needed, and walked away a legend in grease-stained clothes. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers pierce the clouds like modern-day castles, Alexander Reed checked his platinum watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The board meeting that would decide the fate of his $2.8 billion merger was scheduled to begin in exactly 47 minutes. As CEO of Reed Enterprises, he had orchestrated hundreds of high-stakes negotiations, but none quite like this one. Today's deal would either cement his legacy or become the first major failure of his career. The custom-made Italian suit he wore had been tailored to project confidence, authority, and unshakable poise. Yet beneath the $12,000 fabric, his heart raced with the familiar adrenaline that had fueled his climb from middle-class obscurity to the pinnacle of Manhattan's business elite. "James, ensure the presentation materials were delivered to the conference room," Alexander spoke into his phone. "And double-check that the catering includes Mrs. Tanaka's preferred green tea. This merger hinges on details." His driver nodded from the front seat of the customized Lamborghini Aventador, a vehicle Alexander had purchased not for its staggering $500,000 price tag, but for what it represented: uncompromising excellence and meticulous engineering. The car was more than transportation. It was a statement. "Of course, Mr. Reed," James replied with practiced efficiency. "Everything is arranged precisely as you instructed." Alexander allowed himself a brief smile. In his world, competence was the minimum expectation, not a virtue to be celebrated. He returned to reviewing the final contract amendments on his tablet when the first warning sign appeared. A subtle fluctuation in the engine's purr, barely perceptible to untrained ears. "James, did you feel that?" Alexander asked, his focus immediately shifting. Before James could answer, the car's smooth acceleration faltered. Warning lights illuminated the dashboard in angry crimson. The engine made a sound Alexander had never heard from the meticulously maintained machine, a tortured mechanical groan followed by a series of alarming clicks. "Sir, I think we need to pull over," James said, his voice tight with concern. They managed to guide the faltering vehicle to the curb of Fifth Avenue, where it shuddered once more before the engine died completely. Steam began rising from beneath the hood, an undignified surrender for a machine engineered to perfection. "This is unacceptable," Alexander muttered, loosening his silk tie. "Call the dealership. Get their emergency service here immediately." James's expression tightened as he ended the call. "They can have someone here in approximately 90 minutes, sir." 90 minutes? Alexander's voice remained controlled, but his knuckles whitened around his phone. "The most expensive maintenance package they offer, and this is their response time. Unacceptable." The irony wasn't lost on Alexander. He had built his reputation on delivering the impossible within impossible timeframes. Now, trapped by mechanical failure and ticking minutes, he faced the prospect of missing the meeting that would define his career. Crowds began to gather around the stalled supercar. Some took photos, others pointed and whispered. Alexander ignored them, calculating options with cold precision. A taxi would take too long in midday traffic. His helicopter was on standby at the East River helipad, a 20-minute walk in this heat in this suit. Unthinkable. Alexander stepped out of the car, phone pressed to his ear as he attempted to reach his executive assistant to arrange alternative. Transportation. The summer heat hit him like a physical force, immediately threatening the perfect composure of his appearance. A crowd of tourists had already formed a semicircle around the exotic car, smartphones raised to capture the moment of vulnerability. Among the growing crowd, 17-year-old Elijah Carter watched with different eyes. Where others saw entertainment or schadenfreude, he saw mechanical systems, electrical pathways, and potential solutions. The teenager's worn backpack contained not school books, but a collection of tools he'd salvaged and repaired himself, the instruments of his self-taught trade. Elijah had been walking home from his morning shift at Gino's auto shop in the Bronx, taking the long route through Manhattan to study the high-end vehicles that occasionally inspired his own mechanical sketches. Unlike the gawking tourists, he recognized the specific pattern of the Lamborghini's failure. He'd seen something similar once before, though on a far humbler vehicle. Hesitating at the edge of the crowd, Elijah weighed his options. He wasn't supposed to be here. He should be heading to the hospital where his mother had been admitted 3 weeks ago. The experimental treatment that might save her from progressive kidney failure remained frustratingly out of reach. Insurance denied, appeals pending, and the clock ticking relentlessly. That morning, Dr. Patel had taken Elijah aside with the gentle demeanor that medical professionals reserve for difficult conversations. "There's a clinical trial starting next week," she'd explained. "Your mother would be an ideal candidate, but there's a participant fee that insurance won't cover." "How much?" Elijah had asked, his voice steady despite the fear churning inside. $50,000, Dr. Patel had replied, unable to maintain eye contact. "I wish it were different, Elijah. I truly do." The number had hit him like a physical blow. $50,000 might as well have been 50 million to someone who had been struggling to cover basic necessities since his father had abandoned them 3 years ago. Now, looking at the stranded Lamborghini and its clearly wealthy owner, Elijah made a decision. Slipping through the crowd with quiet determination, he approached Alexander Reed, who was now engaged in a tense phone conversation with what appeared to be his assistant. "No, Claire, I need a solution now, not excuses," Alexander was saying, his back to Elijah. "The Tanaka merger cannot be rescheduled. Find me transportation to that meeting in the next 15 minutes, or clear out your desk." Elijah cleared his throat. "Excuse me, sir." Alexander turned, irritation flashing across his features as he registered the thin teenager in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. "Not now," he dismissed, turning away. "I can fix your car," Elijah said, his voice quiet but confident. 20 minutes max." Alexander paused, then turned back to study the boy, taking in the grease-stained hands, the intelligent eyes, and the worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have given the kid a second glance, but desperate situations demanded considering all options. "And why should I believe you can fix what dealership mechanics maintain monthly?" Alexander asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "Because I understand how things break," Elijah replied simply, "and I need exactly $50,000. Alexander barked a short, incredulous laugh. $50,000 for a roadside repair? He studied the boy's face, searching for signs of a scam or joke. "It's not for me," Elijah continued, his expression unchanged. "It's for my mother's medical treatment, a clinical trial that starts next week, her last chance." Something in the boy's direct gaze gave Alexander pause. After 2 decades in business, he prided himself on reading people, separating truth-tellers from charlatans in seconds. Against all logic, he found himself believing this strange teenager. "If you can get me to my meeting on time," Alexander said, checking his watch again, "we might have something to discuss." As James popped the hood, releasing a cloud of steam, into the summer air, Elijah stepped forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his element. He set his backpack on the ground and began a systematic inspection of the engine compartment, his movements precise and methodical. Alexander watched, phone forgotten in his hand, as this unlikely savior began what seemed an impossible task. The crowd around them grew, drawn by the unusual tableau of a teenager in worn clothes, examining one of the world's most exclusive automobiles. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the quarter hour, each resonant tone marking the diminishing time before Alexander's career-defining meeting. The first drops of summer rain began to fall on the gleaming hood of the stalled Lamborghini. Rain droplets streaked down the Lamborghini's curved hood as Elijah methodically examined the engine compartment. The gathering crowd had swelled, Many spectators now holding phones aloft to record what they anticipated would be either a miraculous fix or an entertaining failure. Several onlookers snickered as they watched the teenager's worn sneakers shift against the wet pavement. "Someone call the dealership before this kid makes things worse," a man in a business suit called out, provoking scattered laughter. Alexander stood with arms crossed, increasingly aware of both the spectacle and the unrelenting passage of time. His phone vibrated with incoming messages, his executive team inquiring about his whereabouts, the Japanese investors confirming their arrival at the conference room. The merger that would consolidate Reed Enterprises' dominance in the Asian market was slipping away minute by precious minute. "I've called for professional assistance," James said quietly, returning to Alexander's side. "Barrett Automotive is sending their top technician. He's bringing diagnostic equipment." Alexander nodded, then turned his attention back to Elijah, who had removed several components with surprising dexterity, laying them carefully on a clean microfiber cloth he'd pulled from his backpack. "You have 14 minutes left of your promised 20, Alexander remarked, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his voice. Elijah didn't respond immediately. His focus remained on the engine, fingers tracing pathways only he could see, stopping occasionally to test connections. Finally, he straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Your problem isn't what you think it is," he said, pointing to a specific area of the engine compartment. "There's an aftermarket modification here that's not factory standard. It's creating a feedback loop in the electrical system." Alexander frowned. "That's impossible. This vehicle is maintained exclusively by certified technicians. There are no aftermarket parts." "Maybe not installed with your knowledge," Elijah countered, his voice respectful but firm. "But this wiring configuration isn't original. Someone's been inside this system, someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Before Alexander could respond, a sleek black van with the Barrett Automotive logo pulled up behind the Lamborghini. A man in crisp uniform emerged, carrying a tablet and diagnostic scanner. The crowd parted to let him through, many watching with renewed interest as the professional arrived to supersede the teenager's amateur efforts. "Mr. Reed, I'm Dominic Barrett," the newcomer introduced himself with practiced confidence. "We'll have you back on the road in no time." Alexander gestured toward the open hood. "This young man seems to think there's an unauthorized modification causing the problem." Dominic's smile was polite but dismissive. "With all due respect to the young enthusiast, these systems are incredibly complex. Let's see what the diagnostics tell us." As Dominic connected his equipment to the vehicle's computer ports, Elijah stepped back, watching silently. The rain had intensified, but the crowd remained, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers above their heads. Alexander checked his watch again. 31 minutes until his meeting. "Running full system diagnostic now," Dominic announced, eyes fixed on his tablet screen. After several moments, he frowned. "That's strange. The computer is showing multiple cascading failures but no clear point of origin. Try isolating the electrical system," Elijah suggested quietly. Dominic shot him an irritated glance but adjusted his parameters. The tablet displayed a new set of error codes that deepened his frown. "The recommendation is a complete replacement of the ignition module," Dominic concluded after studying the results. "We'll need to transport the vehicle to our facility. The repair would take approximately 3 days." 3 days? Alexander's composure finally cracked. "That's unacceptable." "Sir, with a vehicle of this caliber, we can't risk improvised repairs," Dominic explained, his tone professionally sympathetic. "These systems are integrated." "It's not the ignition module," Elijah interrupted. All eyes turned to him. "The module is responding to a false signal. There's an auxiliary wire that doesn't belong there." Dominic's expression hardened. "Young man, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't a project car you can tinker with. This is a $500,000 vehicle with proprietary systems." 26 minutes, Alexander interjected, looking at his watch rather than either of them. "That's how long I have until I miss the most important meeting of my career." He turned to Elijah. "You said you could fix it in 20 minutes. You have 6 minutes left." The tension in the air was palpable. Dominic began to protest, but Alexander silenced him with a gesture. "Let him try." Elijah returned to the engine, now ignoring the rain soaking through his t-shirt. His movements became more focused, more deliberate. He traced a bundle of wires to a junction that wasn't immediately visible from above. "I need to access the secondary relay compartment," he said, pointing to an area beneath the main electrical housing. "That requires special tools," Dominic objected. "You can't just—" But Elijah was already removing items from his backpack, modified tools that looked handmade or adapted from other purposes. With surprising efficiency, he gained access to a compartment that would have taken the dealership technicians significantly longer to reach. "There," he said, pointing to a nearly invisible wire that diverged from the main harness. "This doesn't belong. It's bypassing the safety protocols and creating false readings throughout the system." Dominic leaned in to look, skepticism giving way to curiosity. "That's not factory installed," he admitted after a moment, "but removing it could trigger additional security measures." "Only if you cut it without understanding what it's connected to," Elijah replied. He traced the wire's path with his fingers. "This isn't just an error, it's deliberate. Someone wanted this car to fail." A murmur ran through the crowd. Alexander stepped closer, his expression darkening. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Elijah said carefully. "I'm just telling you what I see. This wire was installed to create exactly the problem you're experiencing now, a complete shutdown that would baffle standard diagnostics." The implication hung in the air between them. Alexander's mind raced through possibilities. Competitors who might benefit from his absence at today's meeting, disgruntled employees, industrial espionage. The merger with Tanaka Industries had many opponents, both outside his company and within. "Can you remove it safely?" Alexander asked, his voice low. Elijah nodded. "Yes, but that's only part of the solution. There's likely a secondary component. That's been affected, a failsafe to prevent easy recovery." He pointed to the rear of the vehicle. "I need to check the auxiliary relay station." As Elijah moved to the rear compartment, Dominic studied the rogue wire with growing professional interest. "He's right," the technician admitted grudgingly. "This is intentional tampering. I've never seen anything like it. It's sophisticated work." Alexander followed Elijah to the rear of the vehicle, where the teenager had already opened an access panel. Inside, exactly as predicted, was a modified relay, scorched from electrical overload. "This is the real damage," Elijah explained. "The wire up front triggered this to blow. Standard diagnostics would eventually find this, but only after replacing several other components first." He reached into his backpack and removed a small container of assorted electrical parts. "I can bypass it with this," he said, holding up a salvaged relay from a much humbler vehicle. "It's not the same brand, but the specifications are compatible." Alexander watched in fascination as Elijah's hands moved with the confident precision of a surgeon, adapting the substitute part to fit the high-performance vehicle. The crowd had grown silent, witnessing something unexpected, genius at work in the most unlikely form. 3 minutes, Alexander said, checking his watch again. Elijah made the final connection and closed the access panel. "Try it now," he said, moving back to the driver's side. James slid into the seat and turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine came to life with a smooth, powerful purr, no warning lights, no hesitation. The sound of perfect mechanical harmony cut through the patter of rainfall. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. Dominic stared in disbelief, then began typing notes into his tablet, capturing what he'd just witnessed. Alexander's relief was palpable, but short-lived. "James, we need to leave immediately," he instructed, opening the passenger door. Then, he paused and turned to Elijah, who was already packing his tools away. "You're coming with us. We need to discuss your payment." Elijah hesitated, glancing at his watch, a cheap digital timepiece that seemed out of place against the backdrop of such wealth. "I need to get to the hospital," he said. "My mother—" "We'll drop you there afterward," Alexander promised, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "But first, you're coming to this meeting with me." Confused but compliant, Elijah closed his backpack and slid into the back seat of the Lamborghini. As the engine roared to life and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, the crowd dispersed, returning to their ordinary lives, many already sharing videos of what they'd just witnessed. None of them, not even Elijah himself, could have predicted how those few minutes in the rain would change so many lives, or that the real story was only beginning to unfold. The Lamborghini sliced through Manhattan traffic like an expensive blade, its engine performing flawlessly as James navigated with newfound confidence. In the back seat, Elijah sat in uncomfortable silence, acutely aware of how out of place he was in this temple of luxury, his oil-stained hands resting awkwardly on knees that had worn holes in his jeans long ago. "You still haven't explained why I need to come to your meeting," Elijah finally said, breaking the tension. Alexander turned slightly in his seat. "Because what just happened wasn't a coincidence, and I want to know who's behind it." His eyes narrowed as he studied the teenager. "And because I have questions about you. I told you everything already," Elijah replied, his gaze drifting to the window where New York's landscape transitioned from the familiar to the rarefied world of corporate headquarters and exclusive addresses. "I fix things. I need money for my mom's treatment. That's it. No one just fixes a problem that baffled professional technicians unless they've seen it before," Alexander countered. "Where did you learn to do what you did back there?" Elijah's reflection in the window showed a flicker of something, pride, perhaps, or a hint of a carefully guarded secret. "My father was a mechanic before he left. He taught me the basics. The rest," he shrugged, "I observe, I remember patterns. Machines make sense to me in ways people don't." The car pulled up to the gleaming headquarters of Reed Enterprises, a 60-story testament to Alexander's business acumen. As they exited the vehicle, Alexander checked his watch again, 2 minutes to spare. "James, escort Mr." He paused, realizing he didn't know the boy's full name. "Carter, Elijah Carter. Escort Mr. Carter to my office and ensure he's comfortable. I'll join you after the meeting." Alexander straightened his tie and turned to Elijah. "We'll discuss your payment." Then, without waiting for a response, Alexander strode through the revolving doors, instantly transforming from a stranded motorist to the commanding CEO whose presence could silence a boardroom with a glance. James led Elijah through a separate entrance, navigating security protocols with practiced ease. "Mr. Reed instructed me to offer you refreshments while you wait," he explained as they entered an express elevator. "Is there anything specific you'd prefer?" Elijah shook his head, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from rain-soaked street to the rarefied air of corporate power. The elevator ascended to the top floor in near silence, its soft hum the only indication of movement. Alexander's office suite occupied the entire northeast corner of the building, offering panoramic views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Elijah stood motionless in the doorway, taking in the space that was larger than the entire apartment he shared with his mother. "Please, make yourself comfortable," James said, gesturing to a seating area. "Mr. Reed's meeting should conclude within the hour." Left alone, Elijah wandered the perimeter of the office, studying not the view but the man revealed through his workspace. Family photos were noticeably absent. Instead, the walls displayed framed magazine covers featuring Alexander Reed, Forbes Fortune Business Insider, chronicling his rise to prominence. A glass case contained scale models of his various real estate developments across 3 continents. On Alexander's desk sat a single framed photograph, the only personal touch in the otherwise meticulously curated space. Elijah approached it cautiously, drawn by curiosity. The image showed a much younger Alexander standing beside an older man in mechanic's overalls, both smiling in front of a modest repair shop. The contrast between that image and the present reality was stark. "That was my father's shop in Queens." Elijah startled at Alexander's voice. He hadn't heard the door open. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry," Elijah said, stepping away from the desk. "No need to apologize for curiosity," Alexander replied, setting his briefcase down. His demeanor had changed. The merger meeting had clearly gone well. "That was taken the day I left for college." Engineering at MIT before I switched to business. He studied Elijah with new interest. The meeting concluded faster than expected. The Tanakas were impressed by my punctuality, despite unforeseen mechanical difficulties. They considered it a demonstration of Reed Enterprises' problem-solving ethos. Alexander gestured for Elijah to sit. So, $50,000. Yes, sir, for your mother's experimental treatment. Alexander leaned back in his chair. Tell me about it. Elijah's posture stiffened. She has polycystic kidney disease. It's progressive and she's not responding to standard treatments. There's a clinical trial starting next week at Mount Sinai, a new approach that has shown promise in similar cases. But insurance won't cover experimental procedures, and there's a participant fee. And without this treatment? Elijah's gaze dropped to his hands. 6 months, maybe less. Alexander nodded slowly, opening a drawer to retrieve a checkbook. I'm a man of my word, Mr. Carter. You fixed my car and got me to my meeting on time. He began writing. But there's something else we need to discuss. Elijah tensed. What's that? The sabotage of my vehicle wasn't random, Alexander said, his pen pausing mid-signature. Someone wanted to ensure I missed today's meeting. That has significant implications. I just fixed your car, Elijah said carefully. Whatever else is going on. You recognized a sophisticated sabotage method that professional mechanics couldn't identify, Alexander interrupted. That suggests you've encountered this before. A flash of understanding crossed Elijah's face. You think I had something to do with it? The thought occurred to me. I didn't, Elijah stated firmly, but you're right that I've seen it before. About 6 months ago at Gino's, the shop where I work part-time. A luxury SUV came in with similar symptoms. The owner was some finance guy late for a big client meeting. Alexander's expression sharpened. What was his name? Donovan? Donovan something. He was furious when I identified the issue. Said, his car was regularly serviced by the dealership. Accused me of trying to scam him. Elijah's brow furrowed at the memory. But the wire configuration was identical. Same placement, same purpose. Victor Donovan, Alexander said, his voice hardening. Chief Investment Officer at Meridian Capital. You know him? He's one of Tanaka Industries' other suitors for the merger I just secured. Alexander tapped his pen against the desk, pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just sabotage, it was industrial espionage. He finished writing the check and held it out to Elijah. $50,000 as agreed. Elijah reached for it with a trembling hand. The amount represented salvation for his mother, yet the gesture felt strangely incomplete, a transaction concluding a brief intersection of vastly different lives. There's one more thing, Alexander continued, not releasing the check immediately. Barrett Automotive called while I was in my meeting. They've reviewed the security footage from today and confirmed your assessment. They're also verifying maintenance records to identify when the tampering occurred. Elijah nodded, uncertain why this information was being shared with him. Dominic, Barrett was quite impressed with your abilities, Alexander continued. He mentioned that even his senior technicians might have replaced half the electrical system before identifying the true problem. I just see things differently, Elijah said with a modest shrug. That difference is valuable, Mr. Carter. Alexander finally released the check, which brings me to a proposition. Reed Enterprises has a division that specializes in transportation technology and security. They could use someone with your unique perspective. Elijah stared at him, in confusion. Are you offering me a job? An apprenticeship to start. Flexible hours to accommodate your mother's treatment schedule. Full benefits that would cover any medical expenses not included in the trial. Alexander leaned forward. And formal education. Engineering courses that would transform your natural talent into credentials the world respects. The offer hung in the air between them, a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly distant just hours earlier. Why? Elijah finally asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond this check. Alexander's gaze drifted to the photograph on his desk. Let's just say I recognize potential when I see it. My father was a lot like you, brilliant with machines, but without the opportunities to develop that talent fully. A rare smile softened his features. He would have solved your Lamborghini puzzle in half the time it took you. I doubt that, Elijah said, returning the smile tentatively. You start Monday, Alexander said, standing to signal the end of their meeting. James will get your contact information and provide the details. As Elijah stood to leave, check in hand, Alexander added, and Mr. Carter, the hospital called while you were waiting. They received an anonymous donation covering all additional expenses for your mother's treatment beyond the trial participation fee. Elijah froze, emotion threatening to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. That wasn't necessary. This, he held up the check, was our agreement. Business is business, Mr. Carter. That payment fulfills our transaction. Alexander walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. What happens beyond our agreement is simply human. Outside the office, James was waiting to escort Elijah back to the lobby. As the elevator descended, Elijah stared at the check in his hand. Not just a sum of money, but a turning point, a moment when the trajectory of his life had altered, irrevocably. In the hospital across town, Sarah Carter lay in her bed, unaware that her son had just secured not only her treatment, but a future neither of them had dared imagine. The clinical trial coordinator had already called, confirming her placement with an enthusiasm that suggested something significant had changed in her case status. Meanwhile, in his office 60 stories above Manhattan, Alexander Reed began making calls, first to his security team about the sabotage of his vehicle, then to his legal department regarding Victor Donovan and Meridian Capital. The merger with Tanaka Industries was secured, but the revelation of corporate espionage opened new concerns that required immediate attention. As day faded into evening, videos of the strange encounter on Fifth Avenue began circulating online. A teenager in worn clothes fixing a supercar that had defeated professional mechanics. Comments multiplied, theories formed, and a narrative began taking shape around the mysterious young genius and the businessman whose life he had changed with nothing more than salvaged parts and an intuitive understanding of how things break. 6. Months later, the workshop on the 32nd floor of Reed Enterprises headquarters hummed with activity. Unlike the sleek minimalist aesthetic that dominated the rest of the building, this space embraced organized chaos, workbenches lined with projects in various stages of completion, walls covered with technical drawings, and the unmistakable scent of innovation hanging in the air. At the center of it all, Elijah Carter hunched over a disassembled security system, his fingers moving with practiced precision as he modified its internal architecture. He wore a Reed Enterprises ID badge clipped to his shirt, still casual attire, though the quality had improved considerably since his first day. The algorithm detects standard interference patterns, he explained to the small group gathered around his workstation, but it's blind to modulated frequencies that mimic environmental noise. He connected two components that shouldn't have been compatible, yet somehow functioned in harmony under his guidance. This adaptation forces the system to recognize even camouflaged intrusions. Among his audience was Dominic Barrett, now a frequent collaborator rather than an adversary. The experienced technician shook his head in admiration. You just condensed 3 separate security protocols into one circuit, he noted. The R&D department spent 8 months trying to solve that problem. Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with praise even after months of receiving it. I just see the connections others miss. His phone vibrated with an incoming message. Excuse me, he said, stepping away from the group. The text was from his mother. Treatment results came in. Doctor wants to discuss. Can you come? Elijah's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Patel had warned them that this follow-up would be crucial, determining whether the experimental treatment had successfully halted the progression of Sarah's disease or merely delayed the inevitable. Everything okay? Dominic asked, noting the change in Elijah's expression. My mum's test results, Elijah replied, already gathering his things. "I need to get to the hospital." "Take my car," Dominic offered immediately, tossing him a set of keys. "It's in the executive garage, level B2. Elijah nodded gratefully and hurried toward the elevator. As the doors were closing, a hand shot between them, forcing them open again. Alexander Reed stepped in, his expression inscrutable as always. "Carter," he acknowledged with a nod. "Leaving early." "My mother's results came in," Elijah explained, anxiety evident in his voice. "Dr. Patel wants to discuss them in person." Understanding flickered across Alexander's face. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved, from employer-employee to something approaching mentorship, though neither would have used that term. Alexander had taken a particular interest in Elijah's progress, both professionally and personally. "Use my car," Alexander said, pressing a different set of keys into Elijah's hand. "James is waiting in the underground garage. He'll get you. They're faster than Manhattan traffic would otherwise allow." The gesture wasn't entirely surprising. Alexander had demonstrated unexpected compassion toward Elijah's situation since that first day, but it still caught him off guard. "Thank you," Elijah said simply. When the elevator reached the lobby, Alexander remained inside. "Keep me updated," he said as the doors began to close. "And Carter, whatever the news, remember you have resources now. You're not alone in this." The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital took less than 15 minutes, thanks to James's uncanny ability to navigate Manhattan's congested streets. Throughout the journey, Elijah's mind raced through possibilities, preparing himself for outcomes, ranging from miraculous to devastating. The hospital's clinical research wing had become familiar territory over the past months. Nurses greeted him by name as he made his way to Dr. Patel's office, where his mother was already waiting. Sarah Carter looked markedly better than she had 6 months ago, her complexion healthier, her posture stronger, though anxiety now creased her forehead. "Elijah," she said, rising to embrace him. "You didn't have to rush over." "Of course I did," he replied, returning her hug before turning to Dr. Patel. "What did the results show?" Dr. Patel gestured for them both to sit. Unlike their previous consultations, her expression was difficult to read, neither overtly optimistic nor grimly professional. "The treatment protocol has shown remarkable efficacy in Sarah's case," she began, opening a folder containing charts and laboratory reports. "The disease progression has not only halted, but we're seeing regeneration of kidney tissue, something we hadn't dared hope for at this stage." Sarah's hand found Elijah's, squeezing tightly. "So she's going to recover?" Elijah asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Recovery is a complex term with chronic conditions," Dr. Patel cautioned. "But yes, the data suggests Sarah will regain approximately 70% of normal kidney function, enough to live a full, active life without dialysis or transplantation." The weight that had pressed on Elijah's chest for years suddenly lifted. He found himself unable to speak, emotions overwhelming his usual composure. "There's more," Dr. Patel continued, her professional demeanor softening. "Based on Sarah's exceptional response, the pharmaceutical company behind the trial wants to feature her case in their presentation to the FDA. They've offered to cover all her medical expenses for the next 5 years as part of an extended study." "Sarah," gasped softly. "All expenses, including the maintenance medications?" Dr. Patel nodded. "Everything. They're particularly interested in documenting long-term outcomes in responsive patients." Outside the hospital an hour later, Elijah stood in the weak winter sunshine, still processing the transformation of their circumstances. 6 months ago, he had been desperate, watching his mother's health deteriorate while working multiple jobs that barely covered their basic needs. Now, against all odds, she was healing, their financial burden lifted, and his own future unfolding in ways he could never have anticipated. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "News?" Elijah typed back, "The treatment worked. Better than expected. She's going to be okay." The response came almost immediately. "Excellent. Take the rest of the day. Your project can wait until tomorrow." But as Elijah slipped the phone back into his pocket, he realized there was something he needed to do first. "James," he called to the driver who waited patiently by the car, "can you take me to the Reed Enterprises R&D facility in Queens?" The research and development campus sprawled across several acres in an industrial area that had been revitalized by Alexander's investment. Security recognized Elijah immediately, waving him through to the main building where the Transportation Technology Division was housed. In a secure laboratory on the lower level, Elijah found what he was looking for, the modified relay from Alexander's Lamborghini, now part of a comprehensive study on automotive security vulnerabilities. He signed it out temporarily, explaining he needed it for his ongoing project. That evening, in the modest apartment that he and his mother still maintained despite his improved circumstances, Elijah worked at their kitchen table, surrounded by components and tools. The sabotaged relay had been speaking to him for months, not just about its failure, but about possibilities. By midnight, he had transformed the compromised part into something new, a security module that could detect and neutralize similar interference attempts. It wasn't merely a defensive measure, it was an intelligent system that could identify the unique signature of the tampering and trace it back to its source. The next morning, Elijah arrived at work earlier than usual, the prototype secured in a protective case. He wasn't surprised to find Alexander already in the workshop, reviewing the latest security protocols with the development team. "Mr. Reed," Elijah said when the meeting concluded, "do you have a moment?" Alexander followed him to his workstation where Elijah revealed the device. "I've been thinking about what happened with your car," he explained, connecting the prototype to a testing apparatus. The sabotage was sophisticated, but it left evidence, electronic fingerprints that could be traced if we had the right tools. Alexander studied the device with interest. "And this is the right tool?" "It's a start," Elijah replied. "This system can identify tampering attempts in real time and create a forensic record that would stand up in court." Understanding dawned in Alexander's eyes. "You're not just building a security system, you're building evidence against Donovan and Meridian Capital." "The investigation stalled because there wasn't enough proof," Elijah said with a nod. "This changes that equation." Over the following weeks, Elijah's prototype evolved into a comprehensive security system that Reed Enterprises quietly began installing in their executive fleet. Alexander, recognizing its potential beyond their immediate needs, authorized a separate development track to adapt the technology for commercial applications. 3 months later, the evidence gathered by Elijah's system provided the final piece of a complex legal puzzle. Victor Donovan and 2 associates were indicted on charges of industrial espionage and corporate sabotage. The case made headlines across financial news outlets, with particular attention paid to the sophisticated technical evidence that had proven central to the prosecution. What none of the news stories mentioned was the origin of that evidence, a teenager who had once fixed a stranded Lamborghini in the rain, using salvaged parts and an intuitive understanding of how things break. On the 1-year anniversary of their chance encounter on Fifth Avenue, Alexander invited Elijah to join him for dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Central Park. Sarah, now healthy enough to resume work part-time as an elementary school teacher, was included in the invitation. "I have something for you," Alexander said after their meal, sliding a folder across the table. "The patent office approved your application last week. The Adaptive Security Response System is officially recognized with you as the primary inventor." Elijah opened the folder, still uncomfortable with formal recognition despite his growing reputation within the company. "This is unnecessary," he began. "I developed it while working for Reed Enterprises. And the company will license it." "From you," Alexander interrupted. "The agreement's in there too. The royalties should be significant." Sarah reached over to squeeze her son's hand, pride evident in her eyes. "He was always building things even as a child," she told Alexander, "taking apart every device in our home to see how it worked. Not always successfully putting them back together," Elijah added with a self-deprecating smile. "Success isn't about avoiding failures," Alexander said, raising his glass in a toast. "It's about learning the right lessons from them." As they dined, none of them noticed the young woman at a nearby table. recording their conversation for a popular technology podcast. 3 days later, her episode titled "The Street Genius Who Revolutionized Automotive Security" went viral, finally connecting Elijah to the mysterious teenager from the year-old videos of the Lamborghini incident. Overnight, job offers flooded in from technology firms around the world. Venture capitalists reached out with funding proposals for independent projects. Universities offered scholarships and research positions. Through it all, Elijah maintained his position at Reed Enterprises, though his role evolved from apprentice to innovation leader. The company established a new division focused on intuitive security systems, with Elijah at its helm despite his youth. The following spring, Alexander invited Elijah to join him for the unveiling of Reed Enterprises' newest initiative, a technical education center in the Bronx, offering free training to underprivileged youth with aptitudes in mechanical and electrical engineering. "We're calling it the Invisible Genius Program," Alexander explained as they toured the facility before the official opening. Because true innovation often comes from those the system overlooks. The center's main workshop was equipped with state-of-the-art tools and technology, but also included a section dedicated to salvage and repurposing, teaching students to see potential in discarded components, just as Elijah had once done, out of necessity. "We'd like you to speak at the opening," Alexander said. "Your story is exactly what these kids need to hear." Elijah hesitated, still uncomfortable with public attention. "I'm not sure I'm the right person. I just fixed a car." "You did much more than that," Alexander corrected him. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten in my rise to success. That insight doesn't come from expensive education or fancy equipment. It comes from truly seeing how things work, how they break, and how they can be rebuilt better than before." As they stood in the workshop that would soon welcome its first students, Elijah thought about the journey that had brought him here. From desperate improvisation on a rainy Manhattan street to creating systems that would protect thousands of vehicles. From watching his mother's health slip away to seeing her thrive again. "I'll speak," he decided, "but not about me. About what happens when people from different worlds actually see each other, really see each other instead of looking through or past each other." Alexander nodded in approval. That's exactly the message they need to hear. Outside the center, life in the Bronx continued its complex rhythm, challenges and opportunities intertwining in ways that statistics and studies could never fully capture. But within those walls, a new possibility was taking shape, a recognition that genius exists everywhere, often invisible until someone takes the time to look beyond appearances and circumstances to the potential beneath. And somewhere in Manhattan, a Lamborghini purred smoothly through traffic, carrying within it a small salvaged relay that had once saved a merger, launched a career, transformed a family's future, and sparked a revolution in how we see the invisible connections that hold our world together. Dear listeners, we hope that Elijah and Alexander's journey has touched your hearts and reminded you that sometimes the most extraordinary talents come from the most unexpected places. True genius isn't always found in prestigious institutions or expensive laboratories. Sometimes it appears on a rainy street corner in the hands of someone society has overlooked. For more inspiring stories that explore the hidden connections between different worlds and the unexpected ways lives can transform, we've created a special playlist you can access by clicking to the left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring you unique narratives that explore life's complexities and celebrate the human spirit's resilience. Join our community of storytellers and listeners. We can't wait